Hello, hello, hello. This is Lydia Ford. I help people who are stuck in grief to get unstuck, and I am back. And in this message, we are going to continue our discussion or our talk or the message about several grief reactions that most people, I'm not saying everybody, because grief is very personal, but we have already talked about several normal, and I emphasize normal grief patterns, grief behaviors, grief reactions that one experiences when they lose a loved one. And today, we're going to continue. We've already talked about sadness. Most people experience sadness, a deep sense of sadness. Some experience anger. We talked about anxiety because death can bring a lot of anxiety out of us. And then we talked about two types of anxiety: the anxiety of the attachment that we have for people because they have fulfilled a certain position or role in our lives. And when that attachment is no longer there, sometimes bereaved individuals feel that they can no longer live without that person because they performed a certain way of they performed in a certain role, and when that role is snatched away from them, they have a hard time um, they have a hard time believing that they can actually live and go on, without that person's presence. Then we talked about anxiety. Another anxiety manifestation is when there's a more heightened awareness of your own personal death, which can sometimes, when we go overboard with it, lead to a type of phobia. You're worrying about, well, I lost this one in this year. I lost this one 6 months ago. I lost that one a month ago. I lost this one last year. I lost that one 2 years ago. And now you have a heightened sense of your own mortality, and you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, and the next shoe might be you. And so when you have a heightened sense of mortality, it can develop into a phobia because you're waiting. Sometimes you might start experiencing maybe physical manifestations that are in your mind, ideations in your mind. You get an ache, you get a pain, you get a heart flutter, and you feel, oh my God, like Fred Sanford, oh my God, I'm coming, Elizabeth. Feeling that you're gonna die. So we got to be very careful with anxiety because it can take you over the top. It can take you from a normal grief reaction over to a complicated grief reaction where you actually need grief therapy and not grief counseling. Today, we're going to talk about two more normal patterns of grief, and that is we're going to talk about what did I say? We're going to talk about fatigue, helplessness, and shock. Fatigue, helplessness, and shock. There is an expert named Lederman, and his patients reported that they experience fatigue. Well, I didn't need Lederman to help me in that area because definitely when you experience the loss of a loved one, sometimes you don't even feel like getting out of the bed. You don't even have enough energy. Getting up many times is not on your mind. You take naps, you find yourself, sleepy and tired during the day. You might take a nap, you might go to bed early, you might sleep in late. Why? Because sometimes you just want to put reality out of your mind. And so fatigue sets in, and restlessness sets in, and insomnia, oh my God, can also set in. And many of Lieberman's patients reported fatigue, and we see this frequently in survivors. It may sometimes be experienced as apathy or listlessness. The high level of fatigue can be both surprising and distressing to the person who is usually very active. It's like, I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to. There are people that don't even want to get dressed. People that are perfectionists, that are aware of and are very into personal appearances, dressing up, putting on their make. They wouldn't dare go out the house without their makeup. They would not dare go out the house without looking prim and proper. But fatigue can set up and it can present itself as apathy, listlessness. And so, yeah, it can surprise you and others who are not used to looking like you do. Okay. And it can be distressing to the person who has been active, engaged with reality, engaged with people, going about pursuing their purpose and their assignments, whether it's in the church or out of the church. And when you no longer want to do those things, when you don't care about your own personal hygiene, you don't care about your own personal experience, then it can be a problem. Again, sometimes people say, I can't get out the bed in the morning, said a widow. I'm neglecting the house because I'm tired all the time. Fatigue is usually self-limiting. If not, it may be a clinical sign, watch this, of depression. In other words, after a while, it goes away. Okay. After a while, it goes away. Maybe you have not been to your PC, your primary care doctor, in a while. You've been neglecting yourself even before the death happened. And so maybe you just need to have a checkup. Maybe you need to take a multiple vitamin. Maybe you need some iron. Maybe you need to go to the gym, take a walk, find a partner, find a BFF, find a spiritual mother, find somebody that can take this walk with you, to engage you, to take, to introduce you to some of the things that they might be doing, okay, that brings joy, that uplifts them, that helps them stay in shape, helps them to engage. You might just need to, after a time, just, establish a routine, a time of going to bed, a time of waking up. And you know what? There is no shame in taking a nap during the day. But we're talking about chronic fatigue, where you just lose your appetite. You don't want to eat. You don't want to engage. You stop answering the telephone. You don't want to see anybody, that comes to empathize, to sympathize, to just show. You don't even want to be bothered with people. You have to really watch it, because after a time, those things that I'm talking about should kind of fall to the wayside. And then you kind of re-engage with life, and you do some of the things that I'm suggesting that you do in order to get yourself pumping and get your blood flowing, and re-engage with people. Yes, it does take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but eventually you get back in life and you start to get your strength back. Pray, worship at home, get a prayer partner, anything that's going to help you to not to be just laying around in bed and having a pity party. Okay. Because if it lingers too long, all right, fatigue is usually has a time frame with it. But if it lingers too long, it could be a clinical sign that you don't need grief counseling, that you need grief therapy. All right. And so you may need a higher level mental health helper, psychologist, whatever, working with you. Now, helplessness. Oh my God. Let me talk about that. When my husband died, I just felt so helpless. And the thing was crazy because I'm an independent woman. I was used to doing, things on my own, not really having to resort to a lot of, of help. But the thing is, because I paid my own bills, we paid bills together. I paid my own bills. I was still working as a school teacher. I'm very independent. I had a life, outside of school. I had a life, I worked in the church and I was very functional, high functioning, had a leadership responsibilities. And around the house, I could cook, I could clean, take care of the kids. I was doing all of that. But when my husband died, I just, at the sight of having to do some of the things that he normally did, changing light bulbs, making sure, electrical things were working, those kind of things that husbands do. And when I had to do them, oh my God, just changing a light bulb, changing the battery in the smoke detector, putting up blinds, he did that, hammers and nails and things with hammers and nails and wrenches and stuff that was out of my comfort zone. And when he was no longer there to do that, I just felt helpless. I would just cry over the simplest things. And I knew in my own strength and in my own mind, mental capacity, I could do it. But I just didn't want to do it because I didn't have to do it. And so thank God for my friends, Mr. and Mrs. Hanukkah. They stood in the gap. So when I needed blinds hung, when I needed batteries changed, when I needed lights, bulbs, outside, whatever, anything that involved a ladder and some tools, I could call Mr. and Miss Hanukkah, Mr. and Mrs. Hanukkah. And they came as a couple. They definitely worked together as a couple. And they helped to get me across the finish line. They helped me to keep from self-absorbing and having a pity party because I was over the simplest things. So there's a sense of helplessness that comes into play when you lose a loved one. All right. There's certain roles and certain things that your husband did or your wife did. Think about husbands that are not used to cooking and cleaning and taking care of kids. Think about the shock. All right. The loss of the roles that they have to step in now. I think about my son-in-law when my daughter died. My granddaughter was just 14 months old, and he had to still work. He had to make sure that she was provided for, childcare. He had to look into that. He had to do her hair. He had to get her dressed in the morning. Oh my God. And he did that for 6 years, y'all, before he was blessed with a wife. But for a man to step into a role as a mom, and oh my God, that is a tough thing. So you experience a sense of helplessness. One factor that makes the event of death so stressful is the sense of helplessness. It can engender. It can bring about this close correlate of anxiety is frequently present in the early stage of a loss. Widows in particular, often feel extremely helpless. A young widow left with a 7-week-old child said, "My family came and lived with me for the first 5 months. I was afraid I would freak out and not be able to care for my child." Helplessness is associated with locus of control, LOCUS of control, meaning internal versus external. Those with more external locus of control feel at the mercy of circumstances. I'll say it again. Those with more external locus of control feel at the mercy of circumstances and less able to exert a sense of control and self-efficacy. That's according to Rubenstein, 2004. So those with more external locus of control feel at the mercy of their circumstances. In other words, they are specific things, external things, physical things, emotional things, all right, that must be done on a daily basis. Somebody's got to do it, all right? And so when they feel that they cannot do it, all right, they feel hopeless and they feel helpless, then they are at the mercy of the circumstances surrounding the loss of that person, the loss of their role, the loss of that position. And then now let's talk about shock. Because when you hear about the death of a loved one, the first thing that you're going to experience is shock. I don't care if it's you lose someone and there was an expectation, all right? There was a time, there was a date, placed on that person's life by a doctor. They were going to tell you, like, he's only expected to last, for 3 more weeks, or he only got 6 months to live, or, it could be any minute now. It doesn't matter if it's expected or if it just happens. Somebody gets in a car accident, they die immediately, or they have a heart attack, it takes them right out. They have a stroke, it takes them right out. There is shock to your system, and it occurs most often in the case of a sudden death. But even in an anticipatory death, you can still experience shock. Someone picks up the telephone and learns that a loved one or a friend is dead, even when the death is expected and follows a progressive deterioration of the illness. When that phone finally rings, it can still cause the survivor to experience shock and disbelief. Been there, done that, got a t-shirt. Been there, done that, got a t-shirt. And shock can leave you like, it's almost like time has stood still. And I think there's another grief reaction called numbness that we're going to talk about too, but it can cause you to feel numb. Sometimes you can't even cry because you haven't even processed the fact that that person is dead and will not be coming back. So shock is a big one that I would say 100% of the time, people who lose a loved one experience shock. It's like time has stood still. It makes you immobile. Sometimes you cannot, it makes you have heart palpitations at times. It makes you not be able to move. It makes you not be able to think cogently. It really can have physical as well as mental ramifications. All right. And so it takes a while. It takes time for you to come out of that shock. So don't be surprised if, the day after, 3 days after, a week after, 2 weeks after, even maybe a month after, you're still kind of in shock. You're kind of in la la land. It has not become real to you. And it takes a healthcare provider. It takes a grief counselor. It may take a doctor, it may take a nurse, it might take somebody in the family to help you to come to the reality that that person is no longer with you and they are not coming back. It's final. There's a finality to it all, but that does not eliminate the fact that shock is a real manifestation of a grief reaction. And so I'm going to stop right there. Fatigue can set in when you lose a loved one because sometimes you just don't want to deal with it. And a lot of times you will sleep. You want to sleep, just sleep your life away. You don't even want to open your eyes back up because when you do, blot out that reality of that person's death is in your face. And so you listless, you just don't have any energy, and you got to really be careful there. You have to really make sure you do self-care. Make sure your vaccines are up to date. Make sure your yearly checkup up to date. Your mammographs up to date. Your colon exam. You need to take care of your physical body as well as your mind, as well as your emotions. And then helplessness. We become helpless because that person that fulfilled a specific role in your life is no longer there. And we just feel we cannot do this without that individual. We have to make sure that we reach out, all right, to people that can stand in the gap. I know that when my daughter died, when my husband died, my mom came to stay with when my daughter died, my husband was still there, but my mom also, was around for several days. But when my husband died, my mom and my sister, I think they stayed with me. My mom stayed with me almost a month, and my sister was with me a couple of weeks. So don't be afraid to reach out to those that love you, care for you, have your best interests. Don't be ashamed. Don't be pious and stoic and like, I don't need anybody. I got faith. I got Jesus. He's going to take care of me. I got Jesus and that's enough. The devil is a lie. You're only fooling yourself. Reach out to people that can come and assist you and help you. You may even have to hire a handyman to do some of the things that your husband used to do. You might need a sister, an auntie, or a co-worker, guys, that will help you to figure out ways of getting child care for your kids. You might have to have a cousin or a friend, somebody on your job, a woman or somebody that can help you find places where you can order food that's already prepared, so you don't have to, when you come home from work, you're not spending hours with food preparation. You got to be willing to ask for help. Jesus is your helper, but he puts people in your life to step in the gap and fill those areas of lack where your wife or your husband was doing that role. All right. And now they cannot do it. So reach out for help. And then shock, again, occurs most often in the cases of sudden death, but also in anticipatory death. And that is something that you have to really set your mind on, things that are above and not beneath. You have to pray. You have to ask for the assistance of the Holy Spirit to calm you. Let this mind that is in Christ be also in you. You might need to have times of prayer and worship. You might call up a prayer partner. You might call up a friend, somebody, a co-worker, to help pray with you. You might just need somebody to talk to. You might put on, again, worship music. You might go get a massage. You got to do things that are going to help you face your reality, but also practice some self-care. All right. We all need to practice self-care. So I hope that these things that we talked about have been beneficial to you as we have continued, or we have talked about 7 kinds of grief reactions that are all normal. What makes it abnormal, if after a sufficient time frame that you're still dealing with some of these issues of fatigue and helplessness and shock and anger and blame. When you do not do the grief work, and it lingers and it lasts more than 6 months, a year, 2 years, then you know that you're moving out of the range of normal grief. All right. Even after 2 years, 3 years, you're still, those reactions are still normal grief, but you may not have called on or asked for help. You may not have called on or asked a grief counselor or a pastor, for pastoral counseling or some type of intervention to help you process those areas that you might be stuck in. They're all still normal unless you start to manifest behaviors of depression, suicidal ideations. You just can't not, you haven't accepted the reality, and it's 6 months, it's a year, it's 2 years, and you're still struggling with the reality of the fact that that person is no longer coming back. All right. We can cut off, we can mitigate a lot of things as far as grief when we are not in denial. Okay. Don't be into denial. There is help. There is help for you. And I did the same thing. I don't know why I keep forgetting to turn on my banners are on. Okay. Or maybe I just turned them on. But anyway, I pray that again, that I said something that is going to help you to identify where you are in your grief walk, in your grief journey. Again, I'm Lydia Ford. I help people who are stuck in grief to get unstuck. And you can reach me. You can see some of those things scrolling at the bottom. And you can reach me at www.thegrace2win. That's my website where you can contact me, set up an arrangement for grief counseling. I'm giving 30 minutes free counseling to see if you are a candidate for grief counseling, or if you know someone that needs grief counseling. Do not delay. Connect with me today. I didn't know that was going to rhyme, but do not delay. Connect with me today. I would be happy to walk alongside of you in your grief journey. And it is a journey. And guess what? Everybody in this entire world at some point is going to have a loved one to pass, to die. And we're going to have to, you're going to have to deal with the reality, come to grips with that reality. But there is hope. I don't want you just to cope. I don't want you just to barely make it and survive. I want you to thrive. I want it to transform you. And I want you to know that there is still life after death. You are more than a conqueror because your identity is not in the things that you've lost, whether it's people, places, or things, but your reality, your identity is in the one that made you, that created you, that loved you with an everlasting love you so much that he died for you. You are to die for, he died for you. So reach out today. Don't delay. Thank you for listening, and come back as we will deal with a few. I think we only have a few more grief reactions that I want to talk about, and then we can move on. We talk about a few others. I actually skipped over loneliness, and I want to address emancipation. That's a really strange one. That's a difficult one. That's a new one. Most people don't even think about that word when we think about grief. But I'm going to talk about loneliness, and I'm going to talk about emancipation. And after that, we have two more, which is relief and numbness. And I kind of mentioned a little bit about that today. But anyway, please listen and share. Sharing is caring. And again, you can contact me, www.thegracetowin.com. All right. God bless. Have a wonderful day.